We're having another session within the deep tech track, as Vera just introduced. And in just a short while, I'll bring up the three panelists once they are mic'd up. And what we're going to try and talk to these three panelists about, they're all representatives of the Nordic ecosystem, the venture ecosystem, so seed, early stage, up to A and B round investors. And they call themselves somewhat deep tech investors, at least. So that's what we're going to try and explore a bit. What does that actually mean for a VC investor to invest in deep tech? How do we define deep tech? And also, within the model of venture funds, how do you generate returns on something which is sometimes a bit tricky to detect, to know how to fund, cash intensive, etc. But we'll also touch a little bit about, hopefully, on the necessity for doing deep tech investments. So I'm just going to look around and see. At least the first panelist is ready, so I'll bring up Mårten here from node.vc. Give him a hand. And he will introduce himself in just a second. Just grab number 2 seat here. I'll take the one furthest out. The next one's ready, Tanya from Butterfly Ventures. And Pontus from Finland, from Voima Ventures. Come along. All right, thank you very much for being on this panel with me. I'm glad to see you here. I'm glad to be in Helsinki for this super exciting conference. I would start just letting you give a brief introduction to yourselves and to the funds that you represent. So you're right next to me, Mårten. Take it away.
Yes. Hello. Oh, my microphone is on. Great. So, Mårten Skogö. I've co-founded some deep tech companies. My first one in 1999, and later on Tobii, the global leader in eye tracking. But we've come together now with a new team, node.vc. We are founders, and we're backed by founders. And we claim to know a bit of tech. So we are an early stage Nordic investor based out of Stockholm, but with a Nordic reach.
Great, thanks. And then over to our American in Sweden, Tanya, and Butterfly Ventures.
Thank you, Michael. Great to see everybody again and be back here at Arctic. So Tanya Horowitz, partner of Butterfly Ventures. I started my career in financial services in Wall Street and started my first VC fund in New York, actually, and then had the lucky chance to move to Stockholm, Sweden in 2013 and invested across the pond, so to speak. And then I joined Butterfly Ventures in 2016. So today, Butterfly Ventures is investing out of its 4th fund, which we just launched last year. We are the leading deep tech seed entry impact-focused fund in the region. So we invest in the entire Nordics and Baltics. We have offices in Oulu, which is actually the original headquarters, Helsinki, Stockholm, where I am. We also have offices in Copenhagen and in Tallinn. So we've invested over 91 companies, 260 investment plus rounds. Keeps adding. I'm in closings on some right now, so we'll see if that count goes up. Yeah, so really excited to be here and talk further about deep tech.
Great. And finally, Pontus.
Yes, hi, I'm Pontus Stråhlman. So I'm a serial entrepreneur turned angel investor turned VCs. I'm now a partner at Voima Ventures. Voima is investing in the Nordic and Baltic science-based innovations and the commercialization of those innovations through startups. So we back deep tech startups that have a global impact. It can be health tech, it can be climate tech, as long as we see really hungry and ambitious founders. I perhaps still identify myself more as an entrepreneur than an investor, but I didn't do any deep tech as an entrepreneur. I had distribution companies, so I did a lot of sales and marketing. I think that's enough
great.
of my background.
That's a good introduction. And maybe I should introduce myself also, at least the fund that I work for. It's called Rockstart. It is a Dutch early stage investor. We invest from very, very early stage pre-seed across 3 domains: agri-food, energy, and then the latest one that I'm managing, which is emerging tech. We do maybe 1 out of 3 investments in each of those funds in something that looks like deep tech or is very much deep tech, but we also do a lot of other investments. I'm Danish and based in our office in Copenhagen. But you started, Pontus, actually a little bit defining deep tech as science-based innovation. Deep tech has, many different shapes and forms, and sometimes people try to tweak a case into being deep tech, which is the theme of this panel also. Are you really a deep tech investor? But is there anyone in the panel who would like to offer a more precise, a different definition of what is deep tech than science-based innovation? Please offer up your thoughts on what it is.
I think it's a pretty good definition. It comes from significant research, is the background. Similarly to you, Node is not a purely deep tech investor, but we do deep tech investments as well. But I think deep tech is generally also within areas where it's possible to get a patent and to protect it. And so what you build is a technology where already the technology itself has barriers of entry.
Yep.
Yeah, and the way we define it at Butterfly is very similar: research, science-based. But I would say that not all of so in our Fund 3, for example, when we invested in 27 companies, approximately 63% of those came from sort of university research or spin-off or was collaborative in some way with research and science. And so, so it doesn't always have to have that element. There are obviously other, so AI, ML applications, of course, as well can be considered deep tech, right? So, and those don't necessarily always come out of some sort of university research. But we do look and make sure, obviously, there's defensibility, right? And that could be IP, as Mårten, mentioned. But also there could be IP within the team. And so that's kind of where that research comes from, if you will. Yeah.
Okay, so venture funds, some invest in deep tech, some say they do, some definitely don't. And reasons for why they don't, some would say, is because it's too capital intensive, it's too risky, technological risk versus commercial risk, easier to go into a software play. And also the fund life cycle of a VC fund is typically at least maximum 10 years, plus some optional years, sure. That's too late to really provide returns. If you look at research, numbers out there, they also go a bit of both ways, right? There are many arguing, sure, you can invest in a VC in deep tech. Let me have your thoughts on this, so that also the people here will understand some of the dynamics behind you deciding to invest in and allocate capital to deep tech. Who's up?
Well, if I start, look, when you think about a VC fund, you have to think about the 10 next years, not the 10 past years. And you have to think what kind of solutions the world needs for the coming next years. And at Voima Ventures, and me personally, we strongly believe that the world really needs solutions, new solutions based on completely new innovations. It needs excellent SaaS companies as well, so there will be great SaaS companies in the future as well. But the need for real innovation to solve these large global problems and crises that we are heading towards are so big that we definitely believe in deep tech.
Absolutely, and we mirror that as well, as you know, because we do a lot together.
Yep.
So, obviously, climate's one thing, society's another, health's another. You've got an aging population, right? So all these kind of deep tech research, whether it's research or science-based or not, are hopefully helping to create solutions for a better world, safer world for our children. And so, I think that, we look at it as, okay, yes, it can be capital intensive. And we drill down, and when we look at, we invest early, so we're seed entry only. And so we have to make sure we see a pathway through Series A. If we know that the the company we're looking at, whether it's in quant computing or some other, kind of these new edgy technologies, right? If they're going to need 10 million or they're going to need 50 million, what are they going to need in the next rounds? And we're not a huge fund, right? So can we continue to fund that? I think that's also another thing that we have to look at when we make those early stage pre-seed or seed investments.
To sustain your position on the cap table, basically, right? You don't want to get too diluted in a huge round.
Correct.
Or several huge rounds.
But also, perhaps there is a lack of capital at that next round.
Yeah.
And we don't want to be stuck holding the bag, so to speak, right? And so we need to make sure that there are other funds out there, whether it's in Europe or the US, that would have an appetite for this type of technology going forward.
You have a take on this, Mårten? Or?
Yeah, I think what you describe is extremely relevant for us as well. I think for us it's important. We're not worried about technical risk in general. It's possible to assess whether or not something. Of course, there are technical risks, but I think the most challenging things is many times to change behavior. So we need to be able to understand who is the customer of this, and is there really a market demand, and how will it be sold?
Yeah.
So I think that's an important aspect. Given that you can answer that, then being a deep tech or not, I think, and I think many of these challenges you describe are addressed by deep tech companies. I think another complexity, and what you describe now in sort of the next round, is of course, is this a company that requires a lot of capex? Do we have to build factories, or do you have to build like these 100 million euro prototypes? Then we are usually a bit reluctant. We need to see how that, we need to understand the funding and the road forward. So these are important aspects. But
so what would be the right type of investor for a company like that, capex intensive? A bigger fund or a different kind of investor?
It depends. I mean, there are a lot of companies focusing new technology on green transition, like new approaches for hydrogen storage, or battery technologies applied in new areas, or floating offshore wind. Or, I mean, there are these things that you build really big things, and it ends up being almost infrastructure investments before the technology is fully proven, which I think is a challenging area. But at the same time, I think there are a lot of trends in this direction. So if you navigate well, you can be an important supplier into these fields.
And do you do, Pontus, I'm sure you do, when you look into the numbers, your return profiles, you've been at it for quite some years now. So on deep tech investments, can you debunk the myth that they don't provide adequate venture returns? I mean, of course, you will have some hit and misses, but in general, compared to the software games, the SaaS platforms, etc.?
Well, we have extremely happy LPs who are satisfied at our returns, certainly. Debugging that on a larger scale would definitely also require looking back at the past 10 years when we think that these mobile games, for instance, were huge successes, and you'd have to also then truly believe that same success will continue for the next 10 years. So like I said earlier, I think VC investing is so much about looking into the future that you are going to have to, as a fund, be able to explain a huge, large, bold vision for the next 10 years and find those LPs who like believe in that vision. But certainly a huge part of that vision needs to be that the financial returns will be adequate and great enough to take on the risks with deep tech. But I think that those risks are the whole time becoming smaller and smaller due to the increased demand that we see for these solutions.
Cool. I wanted to get very specific. There might also be some founders out here listening to this session and curious about their deep tech companies and what do these guys actually do to look at and consider deals. So maybe do a round on what do you feel need to be in place for you to consider a company within deep tech. Discussed a little bit about patent, IP, etc. But there may be other things. So what would you look at?
So we invest in companies not only in deep tech, and I think what Pontus said here, we need to have big visions and ambitious founders. We want to see, and we want to have a full team in place. Obviously, there can be need to add a person or two sort of on the core team, and obviously a company needs to grow over time. But we want to see a team in place. We want to see that they really know who the customer is and how they will sell their solution. Usually that turns out to be an iterative process, but they need to have an hypothesis that we are able to somehow validate by talking to a customer. Then in general, of course, I mean, if it's a deep tech area, then having strong patent portfolios, especially, I mean, if it's a large investment to actually build the technology, and if you're supplying it perhaps on a license base or selling through in ways where it would be possible for someone else to replicate, then a strong patent portfolio is, of course, crucial.
So I suppose the challenge of a research base, if you take the deep tech, it can be a little bit tricky to actually prove what is the commercial traction you're going to get. How are you actually going to sell? Because you haven't really built it yet. You might have an idea,
but
I
think what Pontus came across here, we're talking about sort of, okay, where is the world transitioning and what do we see as an expectation?
Yeah.
Sort of the green transition, we know that there will be a demand for green energy. And I mean, we have the whole electrification trend, and there are these trends that show that, okay, there will be a market.
Yeah.
Then, of course, we need to somehow, there can't be, I mean, as a VC, there are always unknowns. It is,
part of the game.
You're assessing risks, but you want the number of stacked risks to be as few as possible.
Yeah. Would you add something, Tanya, in terms of what you look at deep tech cases?
Yeah, so I agree a lot with what Mårten said, but I mean, for us, we look at three things. We look at the team, which is super important. I mean, that's like probably our number one, if you will. And a lot of times when we look at a pre-seed case, there may not be a full team, and sometimes it's even pre-pilot even. So we have to then go, okay, what's the market, looking like, right? What are the trends that we might be potentially seeing? How big is that market? Is it a billion-plus market, right? Is it solving a pain for the end user, right? So those two are super, super important. And then, of course, the technology. The tech has got to be solid. It has to be defensible. And so, you put the three of those pillars together, then you start having the makes of a potential opportunity. And then typically I go a step further, and I might reach out to an end user, so corporate, let's say, and kind of say, hey, is this something that is of interest, or would you consider using this? A lot of times, I don't have to do that. It seems like the cases we've been seeing are a little bit further along. There already has been some proving, but when we do get those very early stage cases that we have to do some homework on, then we always talk to the customers that they already have, but then also reach out to our own individual network and kind of do our DD that way.
You have more to add, Pontus?
These are all, of course, really, really important parts. But at the end of the day, I think it's also a lot about storytelling. You have to have a good story. And it can't be science fiction.
Yeah.
It needs to be science-based, but it still has to have all the same elements of a good story. I mean, it needs to have a noble purpose. It needs to have a credible way of making money. It needs to have a super exciting team to jump on that journey to change the world. So I think that in deep tech, I quite often hear these pitches about a certain feature that someone's come up with, and I'm like a bit frustrated and asking like, so what? And will my 15% that I own of this in 10 years' time really be a fund returner if the storytelling like can't paint a big picture?
No.
Sometimes we help them in the storytelling and try to lift up the ambition level. But I think that it's really about this sort of ambition level that comes up in the whole story.
So vetting these technologies, which can be quite broad, and you cannot be experts on all technologies, neither can I. So what do you actually do? Tanya, you talked about calling a customer. Would they potentially buy this? But you also talked about vetting the tech. The tech is important.
Yeah.
So you phone a friend. If you don't know the tech, what do you have a network of people you can reach out to, I presume, or what do you do specifically to vet the tech?
Should I start? Yeah, but I mean, of course, you find the experts in the field and talk to them. First of all, we do what we can to sort of assess, okay, is this relevant? We do everything you describe here, and I think the storytelling is extremely important before the tech, because if you can't convey, and that's also an aspect of, now I'm shifting away from your question here, but the storytelling is really, you get really short time to get your story through. You need to convince me, but you also need to convince a customer, and then we need to be convinced that you convince the next investor. Yeah. You have to have a short punchline or a short story to come through, and to be able to prove that you're solving a pain point. It's not a nice-to-have feature. This is a must-have for the end customer.
Yeah.
Okay, over to tech. We look at, of course, okay, what are the alternatives? What problem are they solving? And we try to assess what other ways are there of being able to solve this. Then you try to talk to the experts in the field and talk to the people in relation with the research that has been done. And then you look at the patent portfolio to see, okay, what do we see as a way of being able to bypass this? And then, of course, a lot of discussion with the tech team. One thing is, where are you now? But an equally important part is, okay, what is sort of on your to-do list?
Yeah.
What's the plan for the next 3 years? What do you need? How will this improve? Okay, you're 60% better than competition now, but question is, okay, everyone is moving on this problem, so why would you be 3 times as good as what you're now in 3 years from now?
Yeah.
And then, there is never a truth to this. You just need to make sure to utilize people
angles,
you know,
right?
and get as many answers as possible. And quite often we bring someone else to the table as well. We are quite comfortable co-investing. I would say the whole VC space is very collaborative. We want to know who is the investor in the next stage, but many times we bring someone we know is strong in this field to the table and say, okay, let's together evaluate this. What else have you seen? And of course, compared to other companies we've come across.
One comment from either one of you on this, otherwise I have a next question also.
We invest so early that quite often the tech simply is crap, right? It doesn't work, let's be honest. But if we have a great team that shows a lot of commitment, then we can take the risk that they'll get the tech also to work.
Yeah.
That was a quick comment.
That's a good comment. And very true, right? We're talking about startup investing.
Yeah.
So you don't have everything in order yet. Okay, I was also the session before this, and we've touched on it as well, the future needs deep tech investments because it's going to be crucial to solving some of the challenges on this planet for our children, grandchildren, etc. But I also have a sentiment, and I'm not the only one, if you look at different news media, that, well, there was an abundance of money a year ago, year and a half ago, maybe. Markets were different. So many investors had jumped on so-called tourist investors into deep tech, pulling back a little bit, trying to find more safe havens, easier returns. Is that what you're seeing? So if the world needs more deep tech investments, and quite a few people, not just VCs, but also LPs, are de-risking a bit, pulling out. How do you see the landscape and the outlook, I would say, for some of these essential deep tech? It's a grand question, perhaps, but share some thoughts on this, please.
I mean, I can chime in on that. I mean, you're absolutely right. We've had a very challenging, past 2 to 3 years with a lot of different macroeconomic situations happening, and we've been in our fundraise, and have seen some of the waves that have happened, if you will, and so the deep tech area is, I would say that it is definitely an area that is of interest to LPs. However, to your point, even the impact investors they look at this area as well, right? Because of what you said, solving the world's greatest challenges, right? But it depends, I think, on the type of investor that's investing in a fund, right? So we've seen some pullback on the institutional side, for sure, because they're recalibrating, right? But however, I think that the tide will turn, and I think that the funds that have the ability to invest today in deep tech are going to be hopefully the winners in the next generation, if you will. And so, one last kind of comment on all that is that we are trying to solve the world's greatest challenges, and you do have other organizations, so like the EIC fund, for example, right? I happen to be on the advisory committee for the EIC fund, so they are specifically looking at deep tech. And I cannot believe the amount of companies that are coming through that program and we're assessing right now. And thankfully, that €3 billion fund is there, because then it helps to funds like ours, perhaps, to be able to invest and feel a little bit safer about going into mitigating some risk, of course.
Yeah.
So there are other programs and whatnot as well out there that companies can look at, and also funds can help spearhead off of, basically.
Yeah. Pontus?
Well, I mean, if you want to invest into venture capital and you think that a blue ocean strategy is a good way of investing into venture capital, do you really have an alternative to deep tech nowadays? Because we are really trying to bring these unique solutions that are bringing something really new and innovative to the market. So I think that within deep tech, you can still find genuine blue ocean strategies. And for that kind of investors, I think that they should really have deep tech on their mind.
Yeah. A quick comment from you, because that will be the last comment, if you have any.
We're a generalist fund, so I think we would actually be able to get quite a few LPs on board if we had been a sector-specific deep tech fund. There is quite a few dedicated pockets for deep tech and for impact as well as clean tech.
Yeah.
And I think it's needed. I think it's important because we really need to do this transition. But we chose not to be only that.
Yeah. Thanks, Mårten. And with that being said, I used to be in the army in Denmark, so I have to be on time. And we got 21 seconds left, so I'll wrap up this session and say that we have established that we have 3 funds that really are deep tech investors, but that doesn't mean that you have to uniquely be a deep tech investor. We've established that there's definitely a need for deep tech investments to take place. That involves technical risks, aside to the commercial risk, and that there's money out there willing to do it. I hope we also gave a little bit of an insight into the minds of a VC thinking about allocating capital to capital-intensive, risky investments that the world needs. And thank you to the conference under the hashtag of Action Matters to let us discuss a little bit about that. Thanks to Mårten, Tanya, and Pontus, and give them a hand.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.